Linda, you have to unmute.
Oh, thank you for that. I'll start again. Welcome. My name is Linda Kulkarni, and I'm the national co-chair for the Grandmothers Advocacy Network. Welcome to our first learning event of the fall with our continuing focus on the right to food and global hunger. So I'm so glad to see so many people here today. Thank you for coming. The number of people facing hunger and food insecurity has been on the rise since 2015, and if the world continues with life as usual, these numbers will sadly continue to increase. There are 4 key drivers of food insecurity globally: armed conflict, of which there are many across the world, the climate crisis, poverty, and migration. Migration often being the result of one of the first 3. Hunger is both a serious humanitarian issue, which requires urgent response, and an equally serious international development issue needing long-term solutions. Today, we are joined by Leticia Deawuo of SeedChange, who will help us move this conversation forward. Before I hand the mic over to Sharon Graham to introduce Alma, I have a few housekeeping messages. First of all, as Janet has mentioned, we are all on mute, and so I would just ask that you remain on mute throughout the presentation so that we can avoid background noise. Secondly, we welcome questions for Alma, and we ask that you put them in the chat box. So you can access the chat, through an icon on the periphery of your screen. Usually it's at the bottom of the screen. We do have time set aside after Alma's presentation for questions and discussion, but encourage you to put questions in the chat box at any point in time during the presentation. And then thirdly, at the end of today's learning event, GRAN members are welcome to remain on the call to attend the regularly scheduled meeting of the Right to Food team, where we will be inviting you to join us in conversations about key messages and future advocacy actions that we could be considering as we continue our work on the right to food. And with that, I pass the mic over to Sharon Graham, National Co-Chair of the Grandmothers Advocacy Network. Sharon.
Thanks, Linda. Hi, everybody. I just love seeing the faces of the people who I only see on Grand Mail. It's just so neat to meet you on Zoom. And it truly is my privilege to introduce to you our special guest, Leticia Deawuo. But I'd like to share a little bit of background, Alma's background with you, and I think you'll see why she is going to be a perfect fit for us today. Alma has been the executive director of SeedChange since 2021, and before that, she spent 15 years as a leading activist for food sovereignty and food justice, and 4 years as executive director of Black Creek Community Farm, where she worked toward greater food justice with the Toronto community of Jane and Finch. She was instrumental in the creation of a number of initiatives in Toronto, including Jane Finch on the Move, Jane Finch Action Against Poverty, Jane Finch Political Conversation Cafe, Black Creek Justice Network, and Mothers in Motion. In 2022, Alma completed a master's degree at York University, looking at how decolonization, agroecology, and the expertise of women elders in small-scale farming communities, how they can support much-needed shifts in the way we think about our relationships with each other and also with other living things. So I know everyone is looking forward to Alma's presentation today, so I'll turn the mic over to you, Alma.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for the introduction. And thank you all very much for having me join you today for this presentation. I think the last presentation, I forgot the title, it was on food sovereignty. And I got the opportunity to meet some of the members of the group as well. So thank you so much for having me. I am going to share my screen So if I can have a moment to just get that going. I have been taught how to do this. Okay. All right. 1 second. Let me hide this thing here. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Okay. I just thought for this presentation, I should share a little bit about my background. Oops. So I was born in Ghana. I actually was raised by my grandmother. My mother had me when she was very young. So growing up, I always believed my grandmother was my mother and my mother was my sister. It wasn't until I became much older that they broke the news to me that my grandmother is actually my grandmother. So I grew up with her. Her name is Afua Alice. She is a small scale farmer. She grew up in a village in rural Ghana, raising 11 children. Of course, if you ask her, she'll say 10, because in our culture, we don't split twins. So she has twins that she doesn't split. So she will say, I have 10 children, not 11. But she had a small scale farm. And that's what she used to not only feed her children, but also feed her community. She had a roadside sort of a small food shop called Chop Bar, where she basically processed some of the produce that she grows and makes different meals and food with it. And she sells it within her community. I also learned one thing about her actually when I started sort of trying to pull together a film project that I'm doing, that she used to actually give food for free to also young people in the community who needed food. So you can come help her wash some dishes and she'll give you free food. So her work was not only for her kids, but also for the community at large. And when I got involved in agriculture, food sovereignty, and food justice work, believe it or not, I didn't know what the terminology food sovereignty meant, what food justice meant. My only reference when it comes to agriculture was going to the farm with my grandmother when I was little in Ghana. And I started, questioning more about the role of women and the role of rural women in feeding the world and in our planetary health. And came to the realization that women like my grandmother, who on a small plot of land, are actually protecting the world's biodiversity. They are actually make up a large percentage of the population of the world who's actually feeding people. And something that we don't see so much in mainstream media, the role that women play and the role that these grandmothers also play in our world and in feeding folks. I had a video that I wanted to share with everyone. It's part of a documentary film that I'm making about my grandmother, but also largely around rural women in Ghana. But it's quite long for the time period that we have today. So I do promise that I will set up a screening with GRAN members so that you actually get to see the film and we can have a discussion about the film. But this is actually an image from the film, is cooking with my grandmother, having conversations about her childhood, about the land, about corporate control of our food system. So I think it will be a film that many of you will enjoy. Yeah. Okay, so let's go now into SeedChange and how we got here. Many of you are supporters of SeedChange, so I'm sure you know the story of Dr. Lotte Hitchmanova, who of course have inspired so many Canadians. Even since moving to Ottawa, I've met so many people who knows of her, or their grandparents who knows of her and knows about her, the inspiring work that she's done. Not just for Ottawa, but for Canadians and new Canadians, especially refugees that are coming into the country. So the work that we do is really focused on working with partners. in the past, our work was focused on humanitarian aid or international development. What we like to say is that we work with partners and different partners, and we work in solidarity with different partners around the world. So our work really focuses on, being trainers and facilitators for sharing knowledge and connecting people. We do provide some funding to our partners' work, and we are also incubators for the spreading of ideas and influences through policy and advocacy. So really, how can an organization like us really work with the different partners to not only develop develop programs on the ground, but also look at the policy and the bigger systemic issues that we're all facing and how we can address them together. The next, so I mentioned about the piece around the partnership and working in collaboration and in solidarity. So I won't go too much into that, but that's a core part of our work. Is really, it needs to be really grounded in that solidarity. So what is agroecology, and what does that work really look like? And I think when we think of agroecology, we need to think about it as not just a science and a practice, but also a movement. And I think this quote here, I felt also captures one of the big essence of the work of agroecology, which is that it requires us to challenge and transform the structures of power in society. During your introduction, Linda, when you were talking about what causes hunger globally, armed conflict, climate crisis, poverty, migration, and all of it. But within all of that is also the bigger pieces around the power structures, the fact that a lot of the food, our food system is really controlled by large corporations who have really oppressive policies that inherently is also causing armed conflict, climate crisis, poverty, and also migration. I think that's a very important piece that we cannot forget, that the current situation that we are in, that we're facing, is man-made, and is something that can be undone as well, with a shift in power and a shift in the way that we do things. So in SeedChange's work on agroecology, how do we do that? Through seed diversity, so looking at farmer managed seed systems. And you're wondering, what does that mean? A few corporations control the large portion of our food system. So to use Bayer and Monsanto merger as an example, and which I'm sure many of you know, the power that they hold to be able to patent seeds for many indigenous communities who see them as family members, who have stewarded these seeds for many, many generations, who were able to freely save and share those seeds for their communities, and for those seeds to be patented by a corporation to say, now this is my intellectual property and you have to buy that from me in order to be able to grow food to feed people. But also, most importantly, the heavy reliance on chemical fertilizers for those seeds to be able to yield, and the impact that is having on the environment. And of course, the climate crisis that we're facing cannot be understated. And I think it's important that I mentioned that as well. So at SeedChange, we believe that when seeds are in the hands of farmers, it means that their communities can be food secure and they can have food sovereignty, and they have the will to freely manage those seeds, save those seeds among themselves, share those seeds among themselves, and be able to grow food to feed their communities. Another piece of how our agroecology work shows up is through policy, and some of it that I mentioned as well around farmers' rights. In Canada, with our work, some of the questions we get a lot from a lot of small-scale farmers is, can I save that? Can I sell that? what are some of the regulations and some of the things. And a big part of our work is really lobbying the government and trying to, in our very best, trying to shift some of the policies so that it can support small-scale farmers, indigenous seed keepers, and so on. Another piece is territorial markets. We believe that if communities can have the supports that they need to support their local markets, then they will be able to, again, have that food sovereignty to be able to manage their own food systems and to have also their own markets that will improve their livelihoods in the long term. I understand my time is going. Okay. The other piece that I want to mention around our Seeds of Survival program and really how SeedChange got into the work of seeds is actually because of Dr. Malaku and Haile Getu and also past staff at SeedChange. He knocked on our door many years ago, a few decades ago, and he was like, my people are eating their seeds. There's a lot of humanitarian aid, like food that's been flown in to Ethiopia at the time during the Ethiopian famine. That is not going to support my community to build their resilience and to also build their food security and food sovereignty. So really, he was one of the pioneers, or actually the pioneer who really started the National Gene Bank in Africa and the gene bank that's in Ethiopia, and has been instrumental, not just even in our seed work, but the way we approach our work, because we were really focused on humanitarian aid, right? People need food, so you send them food. But what about working with people to actually support their farming system to save their seeds so that they can grow food for themselves and for future generations moving forward? So in terms of food sovereignty, of course, we learned that seeds are essential for food security, good livelihood. We worked with our partners to develop methodologies that support, local varieties, of course, using agroecological methods. And that's crucial, and that's really, really important to the work as well. This quote from one of our farmers in Honduras, I think, sort of captures the importance of climate resilience and thinking about climate adapted seeds. The local varieties, she says, are ours, and we must protect them. The weather has changed, so when we have losses here in the bank, we have seeds, right? And it really speaks to the importance of why local varieties and why farmer managed local seed systems are crucial and important. It means that when we have crisis, for instance, the war in Ukraine, and you heard about some of the challenges with getting chemical fertilizers and all of that, but when we focus on building the local support system for farmers, it means that they can be resilient in spite of any crises that may come their way. I won't go too much into this because I know I'm probably running out of time. But one of the things one of the amazing projects I wanted to share is the Rural Women Cultivating Change project. It's really an exciting project because it's looking at women's rights, climate adaptation, and supporting rural women's empowerment and gender transformative change in rural communities. And let me, to kind of break that down, what that means is you can't do work on women's leadership in agriculture without looking at gender-based violence. When women are growing food just for the family, for the most part, it can be safe. When a woman starts selling some of her surplus produce to markets, it can also make her more susceptible to gender-based violence. So SeedChange partnered with 8 different organizations, 7 that's based in East Africa, and then 2 that's based here, so SeedChange and Coady Institute. And it's a 6-year project with Global Affairs. And And we are really, really excited about the developments that's coming out of it, the collaborations, the regional sort of linkages and synergies that's also coming out of that very project. So, and some key sort of issues to lay out is the inequitable division of labor between men and women. You will find that a lot of rural women take on the blunt and the heavy load when it comes to agriculture and food processing and cooking, and all of that is done mainly by women. Limited opportunities for leadership and public decision making. The financial and legal barriers, right? Access to land, credit. So the projects that we're doing is really looking at some of these key areas. They've actually set up a credit union that all the women supports. They've set up a warehouse and aggregation center that, of course, they're hoping to build more so that the women can bring their produce to the sites, get it processed, and then sell it across as well. So the project is still there, but we hope to share a little bit more later once we have the report. The other piece is our Canadian program, the Bauda Seed Initiative. And it's really focused on, again, Canadian seed systems, food security, and climate change. So big part of the work is preserving seed diversity. I don't know how many people know that only about 10% of organic seeds actually are grown in Canada. So SeedChange hopes to change that by working with different organizations, different groups, to at least add to the diversity of the seeds within the country. So adapting the seed diversity. So we organize a lot of, knowledge exchange and training on farm, and to help the different farmers with variety improvement. We're also, again, creating new different varieties as well. So working in collaboration with the University of Manitoba, University of British Columbia, and many others as well, to support farmer-led variety development of vegetables and grains. So we do work with market gardeners, and we also work with seed producers as well. And of course, a big part of it too is capacity building and training, as I mentioned as well. And again, on policy, how do we enable our field programming through changes in legislation, advocacy for additional and ongoing government support in this work is important. I know I'm going through the slides pretty quick, but the other piece too is really focus on our work around decolonization. As an organization, we really strive to ensure that the work that we're doing is in support and is also led by Indigenous communities. So whether in Canada or outside Canada, again, this is part of the reason why we work in solidarity and not necessarily taking lead in communities. Communities are very much aware of the priorities, and they're also aware of the strengths. And sometimes they just need a bit of support and collaboration to sort of build on what they already have. So part of and I don't have to go through all of this, but a big part of our work is making sure that our work is not causing harm, but that it can further support the work that many Indigenous communities are doing. So the other piece to mention is that, is actually 78 years SeedChange have been operating in 35 countries with over 100 different partners. The work that we do is long. Seed work is hard work, is long work. But we know that it's work that is necessary for our global food security and necessary, especially in times of the climate crisis that we're in right now. But it's also work that, as we know, is not well funded. So for an instance, the international assistance programs has been cut almost 15%. Right now, there's cutbacks, across global affairs. And with the crisis and with what's happening, a lot of, with the economic sort of downturn we're in, a lot of young Canadians do not have resources to be able to, even leverage some of that to support the type of work that we do. And it's really, really important. So it leaves organizations like us, constantly seeking money to support our partners in the Global South and also here in Canada to be able to support our work. So I leave this to say that, this is our website. That's my email address. Please do reach out to me if you are able to support our work. We do encourage you to please support us, especially in this difficult time. The urgency to preserve our seas, the urgency around climate change, the urgency around food sovereignty is real, and we can only do that with your support. So thank you so much. I know that was a very fast presentation, but I hope maybe through the discussion we can get through some things I may have missed.
Well, thank you, Alma. You really packed in a lot in your short presentation. The slides were really, really impactful. So thank you for that. Have a couple of questions, one from Linda, one from myself. So I'll start with Linda's, and please anyone else add just by typing in the chat, or if you want to put your hand up, we can try to recognize you that way. It's just we're on a couple of screens. So Linda's asking, what is needed to scale up agroecology as a key solution to building sustainable food systems? And she's also asking about the organization La Via Campesino, a global network of farmers organizations. Can you speak a little bit about the role of farmers in these organizations in the Global South?
Thank you so much. So thanks for this question around the scalability, of agroecology. I was actually this summer in Tanzania for the Pan-African Seed Conference, and the African Union leaders were also there. They had some researchers there and scientists there, and we had farmers really outside the conference door with an abundance of seeds and different things that were grown agroecology. They were all local seeds. And one of the interesting pieces that came up is agroecology scalable? What's the evidence that agroecology is scalable? And agroecology is definitely scalable, and it's being done. The evidence to support it is also there. And one of the things I love, the speaker, Million Belay, who was facilitating the session, he's like, why don't you just go walk outside and speak with the farmers right outside with all those seeds and ask them about evidence around the scalability of agroecology. So what is needed, I believe was the question. Really, it's more of a political shift and the policy. This is where I think the policy comes in. It is scalable. There's evidence that it's scalable. I think what we end up coming up against is corporations who are undermining the amount of research from local farmers, rural farmers, that are really showing that it is scalable and it is possible. And this is how, for many generations, they've been growing food. And of course, why do you think that is? Because these large corporations have always been making the case that we cannot get yield without genetically modified seeds, right? And that we need their chemicals in order to do that. And they've been promoting this for decades and decades on end as like the food security measure. But we know that that's not true. So of course, they're not going to support any sort of initiative that counter that particular narrative that they have of the global sort of food system. So I think these are some of the barriers. One encouraging news is that, you know, at the UN Biodiversity Conference, at least in some of the papers and in the working groups, agroecology was very dominant, and it was actually kept in the document as language. So there are things sort of moving around there, and there are different civil society groups that are continuously pushing agroecology language into various policies and documents, so that governments, even within their research, they can also put some dollars into research for agroecology and not necessarily on just conventional agriculture.
Thanks, Amma. I'm going to put a couple of questions together. Ruth is asking or saying she's not sure everyone would necessarily understand the term scalable in this instance. So can you explain it a bit? And also connected to that, Kathy's asking, do you ever have the opportunity for dialogue with these large corporations that are making the case against agroecology?
Thank you. So scalable, meaning that, you know, the assumption is that the people that are focused on agroecology are only doing it like on a small area of land, an acre, 3 acres or less than that. And that if you were to look at agroecology on like a bigger scale, it's not possible. And it's something that cannot be done. And actually, I have an example actually here in Canada. I don't know if you guys heard of Fennins farm in Ontario. They are about 100 acres, and they do agroecology. They don't use any chemical pesticides. Like, they are actually doing it. So these examples, I use that one as an example within Canada, but there's other examples as well where it is working and it can work. And I can share also some information with the group after, some resources after, if folks are interested in diving a bit deeper into this topic as well. So that's what I mean by scalability. Yeah. And sorry, Linda, the other Pat, the other question.
It's about corporations. Do you ever have opportunities for dialogue for some of these large corporations with them?
No, no, not necessarily. I've sat in negotiation meetings at the UN, and it's pretty tense. And in that particular stance, it's really difficult for a dialogue on the topic, because everyone sort of come in with a particular narrow focus of how they would like to see the conversations going. So there's very limited. We have sat in conversations with, you know, the food and agriculture committees where some of these corporations have been there. They present, we present, but there isn't much of a dialogue happening because it's not something that they're interested in having around some of this. Yeah. I think there was a question I may have missed around working with La Via Campesina. Am I wrong? And rural farmers. So we don't directly work with La Via Campesina, but our partners are, some of them are members of La Via Campesina and work with them on different, a variety of different issues, of seed security being one of them, and also water, also being some of the issues and the challenges that they work on. Did we lose Pat? I think we did. Linda?
Okay, yeah, so I'll jump in because I'm just pulling up the questions here. So the question from Pat is, to advocate for the shift away from corporate power to farmer-managed systems, who should we be addressing in government? Does Agriculture Canada play a role? Global affairs? Yeah, what would you advise?
So there are few. So Environment Canada. So the way that the work is sort of divvied up, I'm not really a fan of. So when it comes to Environment Canada, they focus on biodiversity. And believe it or not, their portfolio does not include seeds, which is ridiculous to me in terms of that separation. AFC, which is Agriculture Canada, they focus on agriculture, including seeds. I think is highly problematic, in my opinion, to kind of have that separation. I think that when we think about biodiversity, we have to think about seeds in its broad sort of sense, and it has to be included in that conversation. And the work then is also interlinked with global affairs, whose focus on food security, food crisis globally as well. So those are the three that I can think of right now. Yes, and Canadian universities are using the Sustainable Development Goals, and also GAC uses the Sustainable Development Goals as well. So I think it's a matter of, yeah, those three sort of entities, but they won't care necessarily about an issue unless the ministers believe that is an issue, and an issue that is worth being looked into. So even through these departments, unless the heads of the department see this as an issue that the public cares about and want to do something about, no action really happens. And that goes to why the ODA assistant programs, right, are have been cut, because they believe the Canadian public do not necessarily care about international sort of assistance, and people want more focus in Canada.
Thanks,
Sorry,
Alma. I lost my internet connection for a moment there. My apologies. There were a couple of other questions. I've lost some of them from when I was disconnected, but I know one of them was someone wanted you to speak a bit more about work that you do with Indigenous communities in Canada.
And also, if I just interject, Bunny has her hand up for a question as well.
Yeah, thanks. I see that. Yeah. So work with Indigenous communities in Canada.
So we, through our the Bauda Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security, we do work with different Indigenous seed keepers, like individual seed keepers, and also we have some relationship with I always say it wrong, Retni Neantos in Mohawk territory in Ontario. They do amazing work on food sovereignty and seed security. If folks are really interested in their work, I can also share some of that. We also had a program that has now become its own entity, and the program is called Sovereign Seeds. And it's a project that, we really wanted to make sure that is Indigenous managed, Indigenous led for Indigenous people. So they are now a separate arm of SeedChange and their own separate entity that looks at seed work across Canada as well. So if you type in Sovereign Seeds online, you'll be able to see them as well, and some of the amazing work that they do. We work with Fourth Sister Farms. I don't know if you guys have heard of Tiffany Traverse. She's an Indigenous seed keeper, and she also does some really, really amazing work. And she's someone who's also involved in our Bauda initiative as well. The work with Indigenous communities in Canada is something that I think SeedChange we can improve upon, and something that we're constantly trying to seek support to, of course, support Indigenous seed keepers and Indigenous seed organizations or food sovereignty organization on this important work.
Great, thank you. Bunny, you'll be next, but I did want to get a question in from Sharon. And I had a similar question that got lost on the chat. But really, what advice do you have for us about the role that we can play in trying to address this issue, the issue of agroecology and building support for that? Do we talk to Global Affairs Canada? Does Agriculture Canada play a role? What about Global Affairs Canada? It seems that Stephen Deawuo is very supportive of this work. Do you have any advice on how we target our messaging?
I think it's more so even trying to mobilize. I come from a community organizing background, and I always believe that when you start with community mobilization, then you're able to have sort of the people power to then make a much bigger influence when it comes to policy. And I think for Canadians, we don't see the importance of agroecology. We don't see, sometimes we think of climate change, other than the forest fires and things that's been happening. I think more and more Canadians are waking up within the last few years. But we used to think of these issues as something that's happening over there in the global south and not something that's connected to us, right? The planet does not see any borders whatsoever. It's one planet, right? Our food, our lives are all very intertwined. And I always say to funders that it's not even a matter of funding internationally or funding in Canada. It's a matter of actually looking at the issue and looking at where the needs are and what we can do collectively as humanity for our planetary health and essentially our health as well, I think is crucial, and it's really, really important. So I would say that I know that, the GRAN chapter is across Canada. I don't know how many members in total that you have, but it's almost sort of like, how do you build the momentum and build a campaign? Election is coming. For the most part, when it comes to election, food issues are not there. Maybe climate is part of the issues that come forward, but we don't talk enough about the linkages with food sovereignty, food security, and also climate issues. And we don't get a lot of press here in Canada on international work. So it gets forgotten altogether. And the assumption from a lot of our ministers is that Canadians don't care. They want Canada first, And I always say, well, what does that mean? There will be no Canada if the rest of the world is on fire, so to speak. So I think it's important for us to think about some of these things and how we build a momentum, especially with the election coming up, to then, be able to go to whatever minister or whatever department and say, hey, this is what's happening. And there are also a lot of groups. So I know Cooperation Canada, a few other groups have proposals to the government, proposals that are not being looked at right now because we're all being told there's no money. There's no money. Come back in 2025. But if they can have also the public support on some of these, I think it will help push that forward, and hopefully make it an issue worth looking into than what the current situation looks like.
Thanks very much. I want to give a little plug for something because you raised community mobilizing. As you know, our GTA chapter is going to have an event October 19th. You are appearing there, and so am I. And they've done a wonderful job in bringing together international and local issues around hunger. And so I think this is a great example of community mobilizing and educating people in the community about these issues. So I just wanted to give the Greater Toronto Grants a bit of a plug for that event, which is coming up. I'm going to turn it now to Bunny, who has a question, but will also, I think, can continue on because I don't see any more questions coming up after Bunny. So over to you, Bunny. Unmute, Bunny.
Sorry, idiot that I am, techno-Luddite. Anyway, thank you, Pat, and thank you, Amma. This has been a wonderful thing. My question is really very much what came before, about how we, as active grandmothers, across the country can best align our advocacy with the kind of work that folks like you are doing in the Global South, and also to connect as we can with what's happening locally in Canada and what makes it most effective. And you've absolutely talked about the mobilization and making sure the government knows that Canadians in fact do care. I think we can use that focus to try to meet with whoever we can and create perhaps workshops or local campaigns in our community to raise these issues. I don't know if there are other things. Is there a formal way, a more formal way, that before we set off and say, oh, we're going to do this to show we care, to make sure that it aligns with the kinds of work that you're doing and doesn't detract from the work that you're doing? I think that's a very important consideration for us to have in our advocacy work.
Yeah, not at all. To be honest, I find politicians like to listen to grandmothers because you do go out and vote.
Yeah.
And they know that. So that's I think one power base that I think it's important to own too, as well. In terms of alignment, one of the things I was suggesting, actually, I was thinking about was maybe to have a meeting with our policy committee, and then to discuss some of the things that we've been discussing about, and to look at a strategy in terms of what is the best way, how do we kind of move some of this work forward. So we could be doing some of our work and you could be doing also your work, pushing simultaneously. So there's a bit of pressure as well. I think in the international cooperation work in Canada, what they're feeling is a little lack of love and support right now for this type of work. So to know that there are grandmothers and folks there and Canadians who really care, I think it's a powerful message to send, to say, we are Canadians and we care about these issues, and these issues are important to us as well. And we would like to see more attention being put, and we would like to see money not being cut, right? To support some of these really, really important work that talks about, climate resiliency and sustainability.
Thank you, Emma. I think I'm going to go back and recommend that that's the kind of thing we begin to focus on in future, the carrying forward of the campaign we've got underway now, because I have to say, speaking for myself, agroecology was nothing I had ever heard of. And then I started reading about some stuff because I was preparing some materials for another initiative of ours and learned about it. And I think I'm not alone. I think a lot of us have learned about it. And this is so crucial. It's not just sending money to feed people now, which is very important for us to do. What we need to be able to do is go back and support people who want to control their own food systems for their own health and for the benefit of their community. So I think this has kind of brought things home for me, and I think for many others in GRAN who've been active on this Right to Food campaign. So I'm kind of mixing up my question and my comment and my thanks to you. I think it's a wonderful initiative, and I agree that I hope we can follow up with you and your policy committee after we've done some thinking through, looking at our own messages, looking at some strategies and activities, and then maybe setting a meeting with your folks and say, is this going to fly? Is this going to cause trouble? We don't mind rattling cages. What we don't want to do is make whoever's cage we're rattling turn around and take it out on a good initiative that folks like you have going. So I would like to pursue that as well. But thank you for being so stimulating and interesting and so focused on a really crucial interest and need in the world today. I greatly appreciate your taking the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much for having me. It's been wonderful. And I am excited to continue this conversation and this work with you all.
Thank
If
you.
I could just jump in because my mic's on, you'll be happy to know, that we have a little call to action going out to all grants right after this. And the central idea of that action is we care about hunger. And so we're really just trying to say to the new minister that Canadians do care. So when you get your call to action, everyone, please make sure to send it along to the minister. And just adding my thanks. That was just great. Thank you. Linda, over to you.
Okay, thank you. You know, Alma, we could have talked for another hour. This has been wonderful. You know, so I'm so glad that we're just talking about this as a beginning, as another beginning between the, you know, the work between GRAN and SeedChange. So thank you very much for, speaking with us today and, bringing such clear messages and, very much appreciated and so much look forward to working further with you. In closing, I would like to also thank Janet and Sharon and Pat and Bunny for working with me to pull this event together. Thanks so much, folks, and to everybody who's been part of the call. Thank you very much for attending, and so hoping that you're going to, continue to stay, immediately and intimately involved in this work. There is so much that remains to be done, and and we need, so many voices at the table and to be working together. So thanks. Do watch for the GRAN action message that's coming out shortly after an upcoming meeting. So it should be probably out about 2 hours from now, 1 to 2 hours from now. So watch your emails going out to the GRAN email list, and do feel free to personalize that message. And and so wonderful to hear, Alma, how you see that we've got, as grandmothers, we have some power. So we certainly do need to take advantage of that edge that we have that we often don't recognize. Thank you. So I think what we're going to do now is shift to our committee meeting. So we've got a regularly scheduled meeting starting at 1 o'clock. It's the Right to Food team. As mentioned before, we invite grants who are interested in being part of a conversation around advocacy messaging and advocacy actions on this topic to join us in that team meeting. And for those folks who are not interested or planning to stay, just a big thanks once again to everybody for being here. So I think we'll take a shift. Perhaps